There's a concept in quantum mechanics that I genuinely believe holds one of the biggest keys to understanding how manifestation actually works, and it's called superposition. Now, once you understand it properly, and I'm not talking about the watered down Instagram caption version, but what it actually describes at the level of reality itself, I think you will never look at your own desires in the same way again. Now, before I get into this, I need to be absolutely upfront about something. I am not a scientist, nor am I claiming to be even scientifically minded. I barely scraped through science at school, mainly because I had zero interest in it at the time. But years of studying manifestation and my own curiosity about what was actually going on underneath led me down a rabbit hole that opened my eyes to scientific concepts that defy ordinary everyday logic and genuinely invited me to question what reality actually is. I know some physicists will take issue with what I'm about to say, and I totally respect that. This is genuinely contested territory, even within the physics community itself. But others will find it compelling. That's often less about the data and more about which questions each of us walks in already curious about, and that's called cognitive bias. But when you apply Occam's razor, when you step back and ask what the simplest explanation is, you start to notice that neuroscience, psychology, and physics all seem to be circling the same underlying idea from completely different directions. So all I'm asking is that you keep an open mind, stay curious, and consider how this concept might genuinely help explain what so many of us are already experiencing on a daily basis. Here's the short version of where we're going today. Physicists study the universe at every possible scale, from the planets and galaxies all the way down to the teeny tiny building blocks of matter, things like electrons and photons, which are often called particles. Think of them as the smallest pieces that everything else, including you, me, and the stars, every object around us is ultimately made of. And here's what physicists have shown through real, repeatable experiments. These particles don't exist in one fixed state until something interacts with them. Before that point, they exist as a spread of possibilities, all at once. The moment that changes, the moment one single outcome becomes real, is called wave function collapse. And it's triggered by something physicists call the observer effect. Stay with me because I promise this isn't going to turn into some physics lecture just for the sake of it. I want to walk you through exactly what these terms mean, how the experiments behind them actually work, and then I want to show you why I believe this isn't just a nice metaphor for manifestation. There are real philosophical implications, because I personally believe superposition might be describing the actual mechanism underneath it all. So what exactly is superposition? Let's start right at the very foundation, because I want you to genuinely understand this rather than just nodding along with me. In classical physics, the physics of everyday objects, including you, me, footballs, cars, buildings, planets, kitchens, tables, everything has a definite state at all times. A ball is either here or over there. It has a specific speed, a specific position, a specific direction. That's the world we're used to, right? The world our senses have evolved to navigate. But quantum physics describes something completely different happening at the smallest scales of reality, at a level beyond cells and molecules and atoms, at the very level of subatomic particles such as electrons and photons. I'm talking about at a level you usually can't see happening with the naked eye. You need a microscope. At that scale, particles don't behave like tiny balls with fixed positions. Instead, before they're observed or measured, they exist in what's called a superposition of states. That means a particle isn't in one place. It's in a kind of blurred cloud of every place it could possibly be, all simultaneously, each one carrying a certain probability. Not, we don't know which one it is yet, not, it's secretly in one place or another, but we just haven't checked. It is, according to the maths and many, many experiments, genuinely existing as multiple positions all at once, until something forces it to resolve into a single outcome or state. Now, I know that sounds bizarre. In fact, it sounded bizarre to the physicists who first discovered it too. Erwin Schrödinger, one of the founding forefathers of quantum mechanics, was so unsettled by the implications of superposition that he actually created his now famous thought experiment called Schrödinger's cat, where a poor little cat is sealed in a box with a mechanism that has a 50% chance of releasing poison tied to the decay of a radioactive atom. Now, according to the strict logic of superposition, until someone opens the box and looks in, the cat exists in a superposition of being, simultaneously dead and alive. Not one or the other, with us simply not knowing which. Both, at once, until observation forces one single outcome to become real. Schrödinger actually proposed this to highlight how strange and uncomfortable superposition is when you scale it up to the everyday world, like a cat. And yet, at the quantum level, this isn't just a thought experiment. It's a measurable, repeatable, laboratory-tested fact. I remember the first time I properly tried to wrap my little noggin around this rather than just hearing the words. It genuinely stopped me in my tracks. You see, we're taught from the moment that we're born that reality is fixed. That things are either there or here. They are or they aren't. That the world exists in one single settled state, whether we're looking at it or not. And here was one of the most rigorously tested branches of science on the planet, quietly telling us that at the deepest level of reality, that's simply not true. Possibility comes first. Certainty comes second, and something has to happen for possibility to become certainty at all. So how was this proved? The clearest demonstration of superposition in action is something called the double slit experiment. And I want to walk you through it properly because once you see it, the whole idea stops feeling abstract and starts feeling, well, more eerie. Picture a barrier with two narrow slits cut into it, and behind that barrier, a screen that records where the particles land. Now, imagine firing individual electrons one at a time towards those slits. If electrons behave like tiny balls, like classical objects such as a tennis ball, you'd expect each one to travel through one slit or the other. And over time, you'd see two distinct clusters build up on the screen behind, directly in line with each slit. Sounds normal, right? But that is not what actually happens. Instead, what builds up on the screen is an interference pattern, a series of alternating light-dark bands, the exact pattern you'd expect if the electron had behaved like a wave, passing through both slits simultaneously and interfering with itself on the other side. Even when the electrons are fired one at a time with long gaps between each one, so there's no possibility of them physically bumping into each other, the interference pattern still builds up, one particle at a time. Each individual electron appears to be passing through both slits at once, existing in a superposition of two possible paths, interfering with its own other possibility, until it finally lands on the screen at a single point. Now here's where it gets genuinely stranger, and this is the part I really want you to sit with. If you place a detector at the slits to measure which slit each electron actually goes through, if you try to observe the path it actually takes, the interference pattern disappears completely. The electrons stop behaving like a spread of possibilities and start behaving exactly like classical particles, landing in two simple clusters, one behind each slit, exactly as you'd originally expect. The simple act of observing which path the particles take changes the outcome, not by nudging the particle physically, but simply by observing it. This is what physicists call the observer effect, and it's one of the most well-documented, most repeated, most rigorously tested results in the history of experimental physics. It's worth pausing on just how strange this actually is, because it's so easy to hear it once and let it just slide past you. This isn't a limitation of our measuring equipment. And by the way, it isn't that we simply can't detect which slit the electron went through without disturbing it, like trying to weigh a feather with a set of kitchen scales that's too heavy to register something so light. Physicists have run this experiment with extraordinary precision, ruling out every conventional explanation for why observation would change the outcome. The interference pattern doesn't fade gradually as detection improves. It's either fully present or it collapses entirely based on whether the path information exists at all, even in principle. The universe at its most fundamental level appears to behave differently depending on whether a defined, knowable outcome exists somewhere for someone or something to observe. So what's actually happening here? What is wave function collapse and the observer effect? Well, let's put language to this properly. Before measurement, a particle's possible states are described by something called a wave function, a mathematical description of every possible state that particle could possibly be in, along with the probability of each one. This isn't a metaphor. It's an actual equation, and it's extraordinarily accurate at predicting experimental outcomes. The moment a measurement or observation occurs, the wave function collapses. All of those simultaneous possibilities resolve down to one single definitive observable outcome. Meaning, before observation, there is a spread of possibilities. After observation, there is only one reality. And this isn't just theoretical. Superposition is already being put to use in the real world. It's the entire foundation of quantum computing, where instead of a normal computer bit being either a 0 or a 1, a quantum bit called a qubit bit can exist in a superposition of both 0 and 1 at the same time. That allows quantum computers to explore a staggering amount of possibilities simultaneously rather than one fixed state at a time, which is why companies and governments are racing to build them for things like drug discovery and climate modeling. It's also the backbone of quantum cryptography, which some banks and financial institutions are already trialing to secure transactions, because a system built on superposition can detect the instant someone tries to observe or intercept the data. The very act of looking changes the state, just like it does with the electron. So this isn't some random fringe idea sitting in a physics textbook that nobody's reading. It's a real working principle already reshaping computing and security today. Now, I want to be genuinely careful here, because this is exactly where a lot of manifestation content online gets quite sloppy, and I really don't want to be sloppy with you. In mainstream physics, observer does not necessarily mean a conscious human being watching with intention. In most standard interpretations, the wave function collapses through what's called decoherence, essentially any interaction with the wider environment, any measuring device, any physical system that the particle bumps into and exchanges information with. A detector counts as an observer. A photon, which is a particle of light bouncing off a wall, counts as an observer. Consciousness isn't strictly required in the mainstream Copenhagen interpretation, and physicists are still genuinely divided over what observation ultimately means at the deepest level. And by the way, the Copenhagen interpretation is the mainstream view most physicists are taught, which says a particle genuinely has no fixed state until it's measured, rather than simply having a hidden state we don't know yet. Copenhagen was where this law of physics was originally developed by physicists Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg in the 1920s, and it's yet to be disproven. Now, at this stage, I think it's really important that I suggest that rather than interpreting the physics settles the question outright, I'd rather you think for yourself than have you take my word for something oversimplified. But here's what does remain genuinely open, actively debated among serious physicists and endlessly fascinating. What actually counts as measurement? Where exactly is the line between a possibility and a resolved reality? Does the presence of a conscious mind observing the outcome play any special role in it at all, beyond simply being one more physical interaction? These are not settled questions. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics, including work explored by physicists like Eugene Wigner, have seriously entertained the idea that consciousness itself might play a distinct role in collapsing the wave function, separate from ordinary physical interaction. Other interpretations reject that entirely. It remains one of the most contested open questions in all of physics. So while I can't sit here and tell you that physics has proven once and for all your consciousness collapses reality into being, that would be overstating current science. I can tell you the underlying structure superposition describes is genuinely mathematically real. It's been proven. A field of multiple possibilities exists simultaneously, resolving into a single actual outcome the moment something engages with it. And what's even more interesting is that structure maps astonishingly well into something I've experienced for myself directly, and something spiritual traditions have described for thousands of years. So where does the Akashic Records fit in all of this? I've spoken before about a profound vision I once had, understood in spiritual terms as an experience of the Akashic Records, often described as a vast energetic field in which every possible outcome already exists. Many describe it as an infinite library or repository of possibilities, not created moment by moment, but already present as pure potential waiting. And here's the link to my video of how I experienced the Akashic Records if you're curious. Now, when I first tried to make sense of what I had experienced, I didn't really see the synergy with the quantum physics model that I was aware of at that time. I only had symbolic language, which is how we genuinely interpret information. But the more I've studied superposition, the more I've realized these two frameworks are describing something remarkably similar, just through entirely different vocabularies. The Akashic field describes a realm where every possibility, every version of your future, every outcome you could ever desire already exists simultaneously as pure potential. Superposition describes precisely the same underlying structure at the quantum level, a spread of every possible states existing all at once before anything resolves it into a single reality. Science reaches mathematics, spirituality reaches for a metaphor. But the underlying question both are circling is exactly the same one. Out of infinite possible outcomes, what determines which one becomes real? I'm not claiming these are literally the same phenomenon, scaled up from subatomic particles to entire life outcomes. That would be a claim physics doesn't currently support, and I want to be completely honest rather than be dramatic. But what I am saying is that two completely different systems of understanding, one built on rigorous laboratory experiments, one built on ancient spiritual tradition passed down for millennia, appear to be pointing at the same underlying idea from two different directions or language, that reality at its foundation may not be fixed in advance, that multiple outcomes may genuinely coexist as potential, and that something, attention, focus, observation, belief, plays a role in which one becomes your lived experience. So let's bring all this way back down to your actual life, because this is where it gets genuinely exciting. What could this mean for manifestation? Or more importantly, for you and your life, or your future? If the deepest layer of physical reality is built from superposition, countless possible outcomes existing simultaneously waiting to resolve, then it's not such a leap to consider that your life at a larger scale might just be operating on a similar underlying principle. Not one single fixed future you're powerlessly waiting to discover. A field of many possible futures, all existing as potential with your attention, your focus, and your emotional state playing some role in which one becomes your lived reality, your lived experience. Think about what happens in the double slit experiment again. Before observation, the electron exists in a state of multiple possibilities. The moment observation happens, one specific outcome crystallizes into being. Now, I'm going to put my neck on the line here because I personally believe something structurally similar happens with our desires. Before you clearly decide what you want, before you bring focused attention and genuine emotional energy to a specific outcome, that outcome remains one option among countless others in the field of possibility, unresolved, undecided, unclaimed. And the moment that you visualize something with clear clarity, real feeling, real conviction, you're doing something that looks remarkably like observation in the quantum sense. You're bringing a focused attention to one specific possibility out of an infinite field of them. And in doing so, you may be playing a genuine role in collapsing that field down towards that particular outcome becoming your physical reality. This is also why I believe doubt is so disruptive to manifestation in a way that goes beyond simple psychology. If observation is what resolves possibility into reality, then inconsistent observation, believing it fully one moment, then doubting it the next, could genuinely interfere with the collapse of the wave function, bringing it into a single outcome. I mean, just think about it logically. If observation is what resolves possibility into reality, then inconsistent observation, believing it fully one moment, then doubting it completely the next, could genuinely interfere with a clean collapse towards a single outcome. It's a bit like trying to take a photograph while your hand keeps shaking. The image never quite resolves into anything sharp. Constant, wavering doubt may not just feel unpleasant, it may be actively preventing the field of possibility from settling into the specific outcome you say you want. This also reframes something people often misunderstand about manifestation. You are not creating your desire from absolutely nothing. So that means you technically are not creator. Because when I think about my own experience or insight of the Akashic records, it fits this model not almost perfectly, but absolutely perfectly. The visualization, the dream, and then the vision itself weren't me manufacturing an outcome that didn't exist. Looking back, it felt far more like I was being shown something that was already there, already complete, simply waiting for my attention to land on it clearly enough for it to resolve into my actual life. It's almost like as if I was plucking at a particular string. That's the shift I want you to sit with. Not, I have to force this existence, not the pressure of I'm creator, but this already exists and my job is to observe it coherently enough that it becomes mine. And so let's bring all of this together. I want to be completely clear about something before we finish, because I think intellectual honesty matters here more than almost anywhere else. I am not telling you that quantum physics has proven manifestation works. No serious physicist would make that claim. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make a more compelling video. What I am saying here is that the deepest, most rigorously tested description we currently have of physical reality itself describes a universe built from possibility, not certainty. A universe where multiple outcomes coexist until something, observation, measurement, interaction causes one of them to become real. Whether that same underlying structure scales up from electrons to entire life circumstances is not something physics has yet settled, but it's also not something that physics has ruled out. Now, contrary to the majority of manifestation coaches who state, and you may have heard this phrase, you are creator. You are not creating your desire from absolute nothingness. Here's the distinction. According to this model, the reality you desire already exists as genuine potential within the field of every possible outcome. Your role isn't manufacturing something from a blank void of nothingness. Your role is observation, clear, sustained, emotionally coherent attention on one specific possibility, allowing it to resolve out of the field of everything that could possibly happen into the single reality that does happen. That single shift in understanding changes the entire emotional experience of manifesting. You're not straining to build something from nothing through sheer effort. You're simply the point of focus through which one particular possibility, already fully formed somewhere in the field, pulls it into being. This means you are not creator. And I fully concur with this model. And I personally believe this to be the best explanations of how manifestation works outside of neuroscience. And in all honesty, I am of the opinion that there is no well-rounded concept that can fully and categorically explain manifestation within one single science. That's why it's so difficult for so many people to believe it. And having experienced so many different types of manifestations that have come to fruition throughout my entire life, even from when I was a young child, where I knew I would win various competitions, including sweepstakes in the Melbourne Cup horse race, something like 4 or 5 years in a row, to manifesting my family home before I even knew anything about manifestation really, to winning various different competitions, including tickets to events, manifesting my twin flame, to manifesting holidays and freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. I believe this to be true. But here's the thing. You have to become aware to start to see it working in your life. You have to give it a chance. You have to believe it. So here's what I want you to actually do with this. Get as clear as you possibly can about the specific outcome you want to observe into being, not a vague, hopeful wish. You need to have a clean, clear, emotionally vivid, repeatedly focused point of attention. You need to treat your doubt not as a moral failing, but as the equivalent of a shaking camera disrupting a clean resolution. And trust that what you're focusing on isn't being built from nothing. It already exists somewhere in the field of everything that's possible for you, simply waiting for your steady, constant attention to collapse it into physical reality. Now, if this way of thinking resonates with you, I genuinely love to know. Have you ever felt like your focused attention on something seems to visibly shift what shows up in your life? Tell me about it in the comments. Like, subscribe, because I think this is one of the most fascinating conversations we should be having within the manifestation arena that could really improve everyone's understanding of it. So I do read every comment. And look, if this resonates with you and you'd love to learn more, I've got a free live 1-hour workshop on my mapping manifestation framework to help you navigate your journey with confidence and clarity. Go to my website, melindamulcahy.com, to book your place. And lastly, always remember, the universe always says yes. Are you saying yes to you?